Count Corler, there are many important issues that could be raised today, but Taoiseach, I'm starting this year as I mean to continue, and that is on the issue of housing, which to my mind will be a legacy failure of this government unless there's a change of policy. On the 29th of March last year, Taoiseach, you stated the housing and homeless crisis was a national emergency, yet the main causes of this emergency are the housing policies of your government. The results are devastating. The public housing list has a consistent waiting list of over 100,000 year on year. Thousands of householders are struggling with mortgage debt. More homeless people are sleeping and dying on our streets. Many families in the private rented sector have been evicted as landlords and vulture funds seek to extract higher rents. 10,000 people officially homeless, over 3,000 children and thousands unofficially homeless living in overcrowded homes. Every week my constituency office is in the RTB representing tenants whose landlords are attempting to illegally evict. I had a woman contact me last week. She is 60 this year and lives with her partner. She gets up early every morning, Taoiseach, heads to work in the Alzheimer's Centre on a 39-hour week, has been renting for 14 years. They are now homeless since October and are temporarily staying with a family relative because the landlord sold the house they were renting. They searched for alternative rented accommodation but couldn't afford the rents. She then, in her dilemma, reduced her working hours from 39 hours to 28 to bring their household income below the 36,000 threshold, and has applied again to Dublin City Council to go on the housing waiting list. And they'd be at the end of a very long queue if that's the case. Taoiseach, can you imagine being in that situation? What can you offer her in your rebuilding housing for their future? In my constituency, 2 recent planning applications have been submitted to onboard Penala under the Strategic Housing Development strategy to build apartments, not to sell apartments, but to exclusively rent and more student accommodation. The question is, who will be able to afford these rents, and there is no security of tenure. Most likely the supply of over 300 apartments to rent will feed into more HAP tenancies and line the pockets of developers. Your government is set to spend over €3 billion on rent subsidies over the next 5 years. €3 billion. There is an alternative. That is the cost rental model, and what it is more popularly been called now the secure fair rent homes model. This is a universally accessible public housing strategy. It will be accessible to everyone who needs a home and to people of all income levels. The rent would be affordable because it would be subsidised and based on the cost of having provision rather than on the market prices for accommodation. Fair rent homes is based on a proven European housing programme, the cost rental model. This successful model exists in a number of countries, and in Austria alone, approximately 20% of people avail of the cost rental housing. We would need a new housing organisation to be established. This authority could service and manage the finance and oversee the implementation of the Fair Rent Homes programme, and this organisation could work with the Department of Housing and the City and County Council to build and develop the Fair Rent Homes model on a national scale.
Thank you, Deputy.
There could be a target of building 70,000 homes in the next 5 years on this basis, Taoiseach. So why aren't you not investigating this strategy, and why isn't your Housing Minister coming forward and driving a strategy of this nature?
Taoiseach, please.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Deputy. I don't, nor does anyone on this side of the House for a second, doubt the depth of the housing crisis that affects so many of our citizens at the moment, whether it's people who are in emergency accommodation, living in hotels or B&Bs, whether it's people who are renting and are seeing so much of their take-home pay taken up by rent, or whether it's people who are looking to buy for the first time and are trying to put together a deposit, and once they have, trying to find a home that they can afford. So we're hard at work. We're hard at work as a government trying to deal with it. And what can I offer the person that you mentioned, the citizen you mentioned? The first is more supply of housing and apartments, which is fundamental to the solution to this crisis. And we don't know the numbers yet for last year, but we suspect somewhere between 19 and 20,000 new houses and apartments were built in Ireland last year, the biggest in a decade. Not enough, I know, but going in the right direction, and more than any other year this decade. And over 4,500 of those were public housing, built by local authorities or affordable housing bodies. When was the last time that 25%, or roughly 25% of new housing built in Ireland was public housing? That hasn't happened for a very long time. In terms of the cost rental model, which you mentioned, that is something that we believe has a lot of merit. We've seen as a government, and the Minister has in Vienna and other places, how it has worked in providing affordable accommodation for people, particularly in cities. And it is being pursued. In fact, in your own constituency, the Emmett Road development, which I know you've been supportive of, contains a very significant amount of cost rental housing. And as part of the remit of the LDA, the new Land Development Authority, when they're developing public and private lands, roughly 40 to 50% of that will be public housing of some form, and that includes social housing in the traditional sense, the old council house or council flat. It includes affordable housing and can also include cost rental as well.
I think a lot of people feel that this government is working very hard for the landlords and developers and not for the people who actually need housing. There are thousands of people in this city with housing needs. The fair rent homes works as the principle that people pay a fair rent based on the cost to build and maintain their homes. It is not based on the current profit-driven model which you stand on. The fair rent homes is an alternative for people to the current private rental market and mortgage debt model. It offers public rental housing for people with different income levels. The fair rent home is crash-proof. It proposes a secure rental alternative to debt-based housing provision. It provides stability in their rental sector, which works in other countries. And the fair rent home offers security of tenure and lifetime affordable rental housing. And this means people can plan their futures without worrying constantly of rising rents and the very real threat of eviction and homelessness, like that woman I was talking to. Taoiseach, a delegation of Dublin City Council contingent went over to Vienna recently to a conference, and they've come back convinced that this will work. And I think that has to be now driven through the Department of Housing to actually set this up. We could build 70,000 units over the next 5 years and link that into local authority building of 30,000. Mel Reynolds have said there's at least enough land in this country to build 100,000 houses on. So this can't just be, we're going away and looking at this. We want to see it starting now and being driven now.
Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I try my best to answer your question earlier. The Minister has been to Vienna and knows Vienna well, and that's one of the reasons why Minister Murphy in particular has been driving forward the cost rental model as part of the solution to our housing shortage. And I think to resolve the housing crisis, we need houses of all sorts. Yes, we need houses built by developers for young people to buy, or for people to upgrade if they want to buy a bigger house. Yes, we need houses that might be bought by landlords who are going to rent out to people who need to rent for some reason or another. Yes, we need social housing built by public bodies. As I mentioned to you, over 4,000 public homes built last year by local authorities and affordable housing bodies. Add to that leasing, add to that direct purchase from developers, nearly 8,000 homes added to our social housing stock last year. When was the last time that was done? So the solution has to be housing of all different forms, because people need housing of all different types. And yes, absolutely, cost rental is part of that picture.
Thank you, Taoiseach.